Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Fund Manager Fridays with 5 Paisa. I'm Deepika Asthana, your host for the evening. So, 2022 started with the markets showing its true colors, which is to say that volatility has really come to the fore. It has maybe taken a lot of participants by surprise, considering the one way movement that we saw the whole of last year and even a few months before that. The thing about this year is that while we started on a positive note, a host of factors dampened investor sentiment and dragged benchmark indices lower. So, if you are wondering how to steer through the market in the coming months, then you've come to the right place. And joining us today to help us better understand the current economic and market landscape, we have Mr. Pratik Pant, Chief Business Officer, White Oak Capital Asset Management Limited. Hi, Pratik. Welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Deepika, for having me. Look forward to our engaging discussion right now.
Pleasure, and likewise. So I think Pratik, let's actually cut right to the chase. Right now, of course, all of the chatter in the market is around interest rates. The UK, I think, raised rates in December, and now the Fed is talking about raising rates this year. Everybody's talking about inflation. This, I think, United States may 7% inflation पहुंच गया है, which is like after decades and decades. So, keeping all of this in mind, can we understand a little bit about why these two factors is something that everybody is currently focusing on, and then of course its impact on the Indian economy and the markets?
Sure, Deepika. So I guess what is happening in the US, on the Fed rate action
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
not something without surprise, right? As we,
Okay.
last couple of years we've been through
Hmm.
the pandemic, right? And
Hmm.
in pandemic, clearly, what had happened, कि हमारी economic activity had slowed down considerably,
Correct. Yeah.
and different sectors across the world and all central banks worked in unison because they
Hmm.
had to support the economy. Now to
Hmm.
do that, हर जगह आपको पैसा print करना पड़ा to
Hmm.
put that in a simple word, right? You had to supply money to the market, and when you keep supplying money to the market, at some point of time you will reach a point where the value of that money starts becoming a little bit insignificant. And
Correct.
then today, what is happening is the Fed made a statement, during the last year, saying that
Hmm.
they will have to start tapering or withdrawing some of this support which they've been providing to the market, because the cost of goods was going up. Right, inflation
Hmm.
numbers, as you rightly said, is at all-time high in the US. Typically, high inflation has not always been bad for the market because
Hmm.
when inflation is high, the cost of goods are higher, and in a way that supports uh, the overall consumption which is there. But
Sure.
it starts hurting when it starts impacting demand, right? When
Sure.
the goods
Hmm.
become a little bit more expensive, that is
Hmm.
where some of the central banks will start acting in unison
Hmm.
टू रिड्यूस डिमांड बाय इंक्रीजिंग इंटरेस्ट रेट्स. अगर आप खुद ही देख लीजिए, अगर आप घर खरीदना चाहते हैं और आपका
Hmm.
इंटरेस्ट रेट जो पहले हम घर इंडिया में जैसे बोरोइंग करते थे तो 12% 14%, वी वर इवन एट टाइम्स बोरोइंग मच हायर रेट देन दैट. और
Correct.
आज के तारीख में आपको वही होम लोन अगर आप 6% 7% मिलता है, तो आप
Hmm.
definitely you get a lot more inclined to go and purchase a house, right,
Indeed.
at a much lower interest rate. Now, the same interest rate, when it starts moving up, your
Hmm.
effective cost at which you are going to buy that house will go up, right?
Right.
And that in a way is being done so that you can taper the runaway prices which are there. So two three things have happened in unison. The
Hmm.
prices of goods have started going up. So whether it was cement, steel,
Hmm.
all things which went into cost of production, that started
Hmm.
moving up. You've
Hmm.
had demand which had continued to be robust, and
Hmm.
somewhere that is where now, starting with Fed, and the expectation is central banks across the world will start increasing interest rates. Now,
Right.
the moment you increase that interest rates, the the FII flows or flows which have come into a lot of emerging markets
Mhm.
will start coming down. A lot of
Mhm.
the market has also been driven by the type of flows which have come from foreign institutional
Sure.
investors,
Right.
not just in India, but across the emerging
Mhm.
market,
Mhm.
right? And that supply is going to get limited when the FIIs are not doing, and only domestic markets have to start looking at that. Now,
Can I
some of
just
this
interrupt
on
you,
expected line?
Pratik?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
sure.
actually, this thing which you pointed out about the flows, it is so relevant, and I just wanted to ask you one thing, even for the benefit of our viewers right now. So basically, flows taper a little bit because the interest rates in their economies are also slightly higher, and thus maybe they're able to get that benefit in their economy itself, and they don't really need to come to an emerging market where, in any case, the risk is perceived to be higher. Can we assume that?
Absolutely. So अगर अगर आप देख लीजिए US Fed rates had come down to less than 0.5%. अगर
Correct.
आपकी अपनी कंट्री में उस समय आपको आधा परसेंट से कम मिल रहा है तो आपको यील्ड्स ढूंढने पड़ रही है कि कहाँ यील्ड्स मिलेंगी मुझे ज़्यादा.
बिल्कुल.
So that's why
Correct.
they come and invest into India, they invest into
Mhm.
China, into some of the
Mhm.
other emerging markets. अब
Mhm.
यही चीज़ उनको 2% या 3% मिलने लगेगी वहाँ पे. So then
Correct.
the risk of
Mhm.
investing into, because investing into emerging market is not only about returns, right? It's also the
Right.
currency risk which comes in.
Right.
So a
Absolutely.
foreign institution investor looks at his return in dollar terms, not
Mhm.
in terms of Indian rupees or or any other foreign currency in which
Mhm.
he's deployed that type of money.
Fair enough.
So that's where the cycle is going to turn a little bit, where
Mhm.
with moving interest rates, there will
Mhm.
be a lot more home bias, which will come with the
Okay.
foreign institutional investors.
Understood. Understood. So, what do you think that spells for Indian markets? One, of course, from the flow perspective, तो आपने समझाया कि that might taper down a little bit, but even in India, while the RBI is still focused on growth, they've said that in many of their commentaries. But there could be a point in time where inflation does become a concern. Like you said, central banks act in unison. So हो सकता है that even the RBI might consider increasing rates later in this year. So keeping that in mind, how do you think this would impact growth in India? And of course, keeping that in mind, what other factors do you think could be positive for for our viewers? What should they really focus on from a growth factor perspective?
Sure, sure. So Deepika, India is actually standing out quite brilliantly right now,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
I think some of the fears of inflation are overdone in India right now.
Okay.
While
Hmm.
yes, there will be some specter out here, but we've also seen, the inflation has two angles to it. There's a supply side to it, demand side to it, and
Correct.
the demand side is driven by the type of consumption which is happening right now. अगर अगर
Hmm.
आप देखेंगे इस समय there has been a lot of pent up demand. I mean, look across sectors, right? When you look at
Hmm.
consumer sector, you look at
Hmm.
real estate. I mean,
Hmm.
the type of demand which real estate is seeing is unprecedented in the last 1 decade, right?
Indeed.
And this is on the back of unsold inventory at now all-time low levels.
Hmm.
People upgrading, and that also has a demand which gets there is a secondary demand which gets spurred up, right? Cement
Hmm.
demand ho gaya ya
Yes.
steel ki demand ho gayi. So a lot of these things get picked up when you have real estate economy, which is real estate sector which gets revived. Consumer
Hmm.
sector is seeing very very solid demand right now. The issue is more on the supply side actually out here, right? Ki
Okay.
the many times the supply. I mean, today when people are trying to buy a car, there is almost 4 to 6 months waiting for some of the cars, which is again unprecedented, which is there,
Right.
right, on the
Yeah.
auto side. So there are many of these things which are there, and that is reflected in earnings. If you look
Hmm.
at the last 2 years now, right, including the
Hmm.
pandemic year, we had seen FY21 earnings, Nifty का जो था वो करीब 14% growth दिखा था.
ठीक है.
FY22 right now is looking at about 30%, which is
Wow. Okay.
highest in the last almost 17, 16 FY, financial year 2004 में ये दिखा था हमें, उसके बाद अभी दिख रहा
Hmm.
है. When you look at, okay, you
Hmm.
can some of it could be base effect, but
Right.
when
Yeah.
you look at combined earnings of 21-23 itself, this is
Hmm.
almost like the phase we were in FY03 to 07, that patch which we had before the great financial crisis जो हुआ था.
GFC.
That that's the type of earning revival which you're seeing right now, and that is clearly seen in the type of demand across different
Hmm.
sectors which are there. So,
Sure. Hmm.
so that's one factor which is playing out. I think the other one which we're feeling very very confident about is the revival on the manufacturing side.
Okay.
That the whole China plus one story, the PLI
Hmm.
scheme
Right.
which the government has launched. Again,
Mhm.
there was a report I was reading which talked about how in the mobile industry, right,
Mhm.
where you used to have almost $6 to $7 billion of imports, and now we are
Mhm.
actually going to have, we have turned into an exporter from being a
Mhm.
net importer, right? So
Mhm.
so many many sectors
Mhm.
are going to see benefit from this whole manufacturing piece which is there. We are actually seeing almost $400 billion of exports, merchandise export in FY22, right?
Okay.
So, and finally, I think even the banking capex cycle is seeing some
Right.
early shoots, right? NPL,
Mhm.
which used to be always, कि कितने हमारे नॉन परफॉर्मिंग एसेट्स हैं, आज की तारीख
Okay.
में आपको वो पूरे पेपर पढ़ोगे तो उसमें आपको बैक पेज पे भी वो न्यूज़ नहीं दिखाई देगी, राइट? Which used to be front page some time
Right.
back.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
Capex cycle, although early shoots you can see, but you are seeing a little bit of pickup around there. So there are
Mhm.
many things to look forward to, Deepika,
Mhm.
right now, and some of this will be reflected in the next few months when when you start seeing these news flow come through.
Mhm. Understood. Understood. Very interesting, Pratik. I mean, I like the way you've kind of woven this whole thing together. But my just takeaway from this, also for the benefit of our viewers, तो आप बोल रहे हैं कि definitely the fuel for growth is definitely there in India right now, independent of the inflation and the interest rate cycle. The manufacturing side, where which is also seeing a great push from the government, and externalities in terms of where China is at right now with respect to the rest of the world, that's going to be positive for India. On the banking side as well, like you said, and I've also, as a matter of fact, read several reports talking about how all of the bad loans in the aftermath of the global financial crisis now either they've been accounted for or they're off the balance sheets. Thus, the
बिल्कुल.
banking sector is getting stronger. So that's a big positive as well. But I just wanted to ask you one thing. You mentioned the growth number for Nifty, right? Earnings growth number. But do you think that many of the traditional assets like equities are fairly valued? Like this 30% growth is already valued, and there might not be much room for upside from here?
Uh, Thanks. I mean, this is a question which we keep solving for Deepika. When predicting, what is going to happen in the market in a very short term, right? In terms of, are we fully valued or, is there more scope? Is like
Mhm.
flipping a coin and saying, is it going to be heads or tail, right? Because
Okay.
what does happen is that a lot of times, of course, markets do tend to price much, a lot of the information out there. Having
Yeah.
said that, there are the times when when the movements happen is when you see either positive or negative surprises, right?
Mhm.
So is a lot of this in the market at this point of time? We've seen a great run in the market over the last 2 years, right?
Right.
Is there a possibility that you will see something similar happen? It's very difficult to predict that, Deepika, in the short run,
Sure.
right?
Mhm.
This the stories which, I mean, the whole India backdrop or the India story which is there is a more
Mhm.
long-term cyclic, long-term story,
Mhm.
which is going to play out over the next decade, right? Uh,
Okay.
Led
Mhm.
by these tailwinds which are there. How
Mhm.
will it impact the market in the short term is almost impossible to predict,
Mhm.
Deepika.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I agree. Of course, what happens in the market in the short term is literally anybody's guess. Yet we try. But having said that, Pratik, I think जो आपने बोला in terms of the decadal growth story that India is currently, the opportunity that India is currently offering. Keeping that in mind, what would you, suggest how our investors should position their portfolios, maybe from an asset allocation perspective, maybe from a thematic or risk perspective, just like how they can play out this story, keeping in mind that
Sure.
maybe their investment time frame is long term in nature, more than 2 to 3 years.
Sure. Sure. So what happens ना, दीपिका, अगर आप देखें,
Mhm.
प्रेडिक्टिंग कि कौन सा सेक्टर किस साल अच्छा करेगा is always going to be very difficult,
Sure.
right? आप like last year took a lot of people by surprise, right? Beaten down,
Mm.
cyclicals had a great year, commodities had a great year, real estate
Yeah.
had a very good year, right? Some of these
Mhm.
were completely lost in the woods, right? And
Mhm.
they've come out to become heroes.
Right.
Previously, you suddenly saw pharma, IT sector do well,
Right.
and now IT
Mhm.
sector went for a slumber last year, doesn't
Mhm.
mean that the fundamentals of this space is not great, right? In
Mhm.
general,
Mhm.
if you were to think of it, we find some great quality names in
Mhm.
the whole financial sector space, especially the private sector financials.
Okay.
We find amazing opportunities in the technology stack, right? And
Okay.
again, technology not as a narrow tech, but it's more the
Mhm.
digital ecosystem, is what I would
Okay.
say.
Mhm.
And there are again some of the consumption stories which are coming up, not just in the large cap side, but even the small and mid cap are
Mhm.
showing great promise. Now,
Mhm.
so as long as you can build a balanced, diversified portfolio, right,
Mhm.
without taking strong thematic bets, because प्रॉब्लम क्या हो रहा है कि लोग को लगा कि टेक्नोलॉजी ने बहुत अच्छा किया है पिछले साल, तो नंबर वन फंड है सारे सेक्टोरल फंड्स टेक्नोलॉजी, तो सारे लोग जाके
Mhm.
पैसे टेक्नोलॉजी फंड्स में डाल देते हैं. Now
Correct.
that's
Correct.
not the right way to do it, right? You'll
Mhm.
have to build a balanced portfolio.
Mhm.
In a lot of times that balance can be achieved by having a flexi cap, multi cap type of an exposure. Yeah,
Sure. Okay.
like a balanced advantage fund type, where you have a BAF
Mhm.
where debt or equity ki beech mein, you're able to get that type of exposure, right?
Right.
And there is always room for some of the alternatives, whether it
Mhm.
is through REITs in the real estate
Mhm.
space, or
Mhm.
at times there are some arbitrage funds. So some of those
Mhm.
neutral strategies which help
Mhm.
you achieve some stability to that portfolio. Just remember, winners rotate, right? And
Right.
when they rotate, um, by trying to always chase winners, there
Mhm.
is a very high cost you would play by
Mhm.
trying to chase a winner when the winner is
Okay.
already past its prime. So
Mhm.
it's very important to have a balanced portfolio across sectors, across asset classes.
Interesting. So I really like the bit which you said about not maybe getting married to a particular theme, because often we hear about diversification, of course, from the perspective of asset class, would debt equity wala, to diversification is, I think all of us understand it, but across diversification, across themes, because winners rotate, I think that's a very important takeaway for me today, because like you said, everything is cyclical and over a period of time some perform, some don't, but the fundamentals over the long term maybe don't change that much. And it becomes even more important, I mean, the way the market has been over the last 3 weeks at least, uh, it would make you, I mean, investor behavior is such that you respond to sentiment, right? And it's very difficult to actually stick to your allocations in such a market scenario. So keeping that in mind, Pratik, also, do you think anything from a risk mitigation perspective, of course what you said about diversification absolutely holds true, but more from a overall portfolio construction, debt equity, is there room to play some commodities as well, or international investments? Is that something that we can probably discuss a little bit?
Sorry, sorry, I
Yeah,
just
so
lost that point.
no,
Did we say international?
no, so I just wanted to understand that from an overall portfolio allocation perspective, while we will definitely diversify between debt and equity, but is there room to also include other asset classes like maybe a gold, or also international investments, small exposures? Do you think there could be some room to also diversify within these?
So sure. See, we definitely. I mean, gold has suddenly gone out of favor, right? In the last 2 years, it was among it was actually, if you just rewind 2 years back, gold had an absolutely amazing rally. Was
Right.
one of the best performing asset classes
Yeah.
in 2019, and then it fell off, where it was very counterintuitive, where you thought during pandemic something like gold would do well, but it
Yeah.
actually had a pretty poor run during that period,
Sure. Yeah.
which again brings to the same point, right? That there's definitely room to play a 5% type of an allocation into
Mhm.
gold, which provides that level of stability.
Mhm.
And international is a very very important place, right? While we
Okay.
believe that India, India is a great multi-decadal story right now,
Mhm.
with the type of tailwinds which we have, but there are a lot of themes you can't play in India, right? Some of
Mhm.
the again, when we look at the whole digital ecosystem, for example, right? You're seeing a few
Mhm.
initial listings which have happened, but there's a lot more maturity in that whole technology digital space in some of the developed markets, right?
Sure.
Like US.
Mhm.
And today
Mhm.
you have opportunities to invest into those areas.
Mhm.
There is commodity as a space does not really
Mhm.
have much representation in India, but when you look at
Right.
markets across emerging markets, right, in Russia, Brazil, some of these
Mhm.
countries have a very vibrant commodity market, which is
Right.
there. So
Mhm.
there is definitely scope, and a must, I would think, that
Mhm.
Indian investors should look in terms of having building at least up to 10 to 20% exposure into international funds. These
Mhm.
are funds which will give very strong diversification, and more
Mhm.
importantly एक जो आपका कोरिलेशन होता है ना एसेट क्लासेस का वो वहाँ नहीं होगा. तो अगर जैसे यहाँ पर
Mhm.
if you had a very sharp fall
Mhm.
in certain themes,
Mhm.
some of the other areas may actually give you some level of protection over a shorter period of time. So the
Sure.
objective
Mhm.
when you build a diversified portfolio should definitely include, equity, debt, real estate, some of the other alternatives, international.
Mhm. Mhm.
All of that should be in certain proportion to build that type of portfolio.
Excellent.
Of course,
Excellent.
what is also important
Uh,
at times international में क्या होता है कि अगर आपकी
mhm.
objectives भी वैसे aligned,
Mhm.
right? So if your objectives are also agar aap, if your kids are going to go for studies overseas, right, it
Mhm.
helps you plan for a particular objective, and
Correct.
gives you also a currency hedge कि अगर dollar
Mhm.
rupee suddenly goes, the dollar depreciates in a
Mhm.
significant way. By having exposure in a US dollar fund
Mhm.
will help you align to that objective of a kid's education.
Indeed, indeed. And so, and also, I think now it's become increasingly easy for Indian investors to get that foreign international investment exposure. I think पहले थोड़ा challenging था because it's very difficult, I think, at a retail level for us to go buy foreign equities, right? वो बहुत difficult होता है. But now with a lot of international funds, mutual funds available in India, uh, that journey has also become easier. But yes, great. I think I completely agree with you about the international exposure because there, like you very nicely pointed out, and I'll just like to summarize as well, that of course there is the innovation play, which you don't get in India, especially on the digital and technology side. Of course, there is the hedge against currency. Currency risk gets minimized because you are earning in a foreign currency, and if as an emerging market currency, apna currency tends to depreciate, so that gives us some sort of a benefit, and especially if you have foreign currency denominated liabilities, then it's even better because you kind of hedge that with your foreign currency asset exposure. And then of course the diversification benefits, as you highlighted, the correlations are low to negative, and if you're looking to build a diversified portfolio, I would just like to underline jo aapne bola, that at least 15 to 20% or about 15 to 20% exposure can be considered basis obviously every individual's risk profile. I mean, of course, I think वो blanket हम लोग नहीं बोल सकते, but basis everybody's risk profile, we can go ahead with that. So thanks, Pratik. I think beautifully we kind of went down the funnel from what the entire landscape from an economic and market perspective looks like, and then how our viewers can actually play this landscape and build robust long-term portfolios. Just if there are some words that you would like to wind up the conversation with.
No, so I would just, I think you've summarized things beautifully, Deepika, in terms of this.
Mhm.
I would just say that, for investors, uh, and this is just a word of, advice and caution. There is, a lot of times we get a lot of sound bites. Um,
Hmm.
Investing is a journey, right? Which is like running a marathon. It's not a sprint, which
Hmm.
trading comes with, right? I know that we've had a lot of investors, new investors today. There have been many demat accounts which have been opened,
Right.
right? And in general, there has been a lot of excitement about markets moving up and wealth getting created.
Mhm.
Uh, but the thing is that if people are looking at long term savings and investment plans, uh,
Mhm.
with the help of your financial advisor, it is very very important uh, to look at it from a much longer term perspective,
Mhm.
without getting too concerned about what's happening in the near term. We are all very lucky. We are in India right now, which is a great story. On the
Mhm.
economic side, there are strong tailwinds. There are amazing companies,
Mhm.
with very good corporate governance, and a very vibrant financial market in India, which provides us that
Mhm.
liquidity. So
Mhm.
with a good financial plan, I think we'll be able to create it. So I guess in mind, people should just be wary of trying to time markets, trying to take those
Mhm.
bets which are more short term nature, if the
Mhm.
idea is to create longer term wealth. So I guess those are my final words around this, Deepika.
Perfect, and that's really ending it on a high note. Actually, कि if you're looking to create wealth, long term is should be look at your investments through a long term lens. Short term के बारे में तो I think none of us can say what's going to happen. So better left alone. So thanks, Pratik. Thank you very much for joining us today, sharing some fabulous nuggets of wisdom with us. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, viewers, for tuning in. I will see you next Friday. Thank you.